they weren't sure if it was Catherine's or not.
Paul Novak was a highly regarded paramedic.
This is somebody who had won a lot of awards for life-saving measures. He had volunteered after 9/11.
Something had happened to Catherine.
Catherine, she was a born volunteer, a giver, and there aren't a lot of people like that, and communities depend on them.
She took care of people that were down in their luck. She cared for people that needed fixing. She wanted to put the energy into making better.
I actually found out that they found a body in the basement from my mother, who found out from one of the volunteer firefighters that was there.
They discovered this house that is completely torched. I mean, it is absolutely completely torched.
Pretty much everything that could be brought to light was brought to light.
The whole story really hinges on this underworld or this community of paramedics.
I'm a man, and I have to take responsibility for what I was part of. Forcefully for Catherine and her children. What I did was wrong. There doesn't a day go by that I wish I had nothing to do with this. And then I wish Catherine was still alive.
From the first minute that I met Scott Sherwood, I found him to be a kind and nice person, very scared of being in the situation that he was in, but a good person. You can't just take what the facts are and put them in a vacuum. It's also who the person is. Scott Sherwood was a paramedic for years, devoting his life to helping people.
Scott Sherwood's lawyer essentially is alleging that his client fell victim to an evil force.
If someone is good enough and they have a strong enough desire, you can manipulate most people to do most things. You can manipulate even good people to do the wrong thing. And you just need someone with some very twisted morals to do that.
Scott Sherwood does seem like somebody who would be a sympathetic character in many ways. He would be the perfect person to take advantage of in a lot of respects.
One, you have Mr. Sherwood, who always wants to do the right thing and always is a caring and generous person. And then you have a person like Paul Novak.
Two medics working together at a New York hospital, one good, one bad. One's certainly not the hero of 9/11 as he once appeared to be.
Individuals who are working together in high-risk situations, life-saving situations, I think there is a bond that is difficult to describe outside of that. We see that with people in the military who are in combat together. We see this in emergency services, where people are riding an ambulance day in and day out, saving lives.
The plan came out in probably November, December probably. It was very short time. Up there in the middle of nowhere, and nobody would know, nobody would see it.
Tiny little town, quite opposite in every way you can imagine from Queens.
It's just a very stable, kind of quiet, almost a farming kind of community.
was Christmas, and we were actually having a holiday dinner at a friend's house outside of Narrowsburg, and the local paper was on the table, and I looked at it, and there was a color picture on it of a fire or a charred house, and underneath it said, "A local woman dies in fire." And I read the first line of the story, and there was her name.
We're in a very small town, and people notice things in a small town. And so these neighbors are absolutely horrified at what has happened. They're probably a little bit scared. They're a little bit confused.
I immediately thought, oh my God, she was murdered. It's a place where things can happen because it's a rural community, and you're far from neighbors, you're far from the authorities, and on a dark night, a lot of things can happen if you have somebody with malign intent. They started digging, and by the afternoon, they had come to the basement level of the house, and they found Catherine's body on the floor and the dog in a kennel, also dead.
There were so many just unusual details and so much mystery. I mean, how did Catherine end up in the basement? How did the dog get there? You know, why was the dog there? What started this fire? I think the neighbors are just absolutely horrified, and I think they're mystified.
Catherine's death left a hole in the community. It's just heartbreaking. That mother loved her children, and they are motherless. It's terrible.
Paul and Catherine met in 1996 at a barbecue. They had a relatively short courtship. At the beginning, things were very, very happy. Catherine was raised with her parents and with 3 older brothers. She lived in a suburb, though, of New York. And I think one of the things that really kind of hit home is just the lack of financial resources they have.
Catherine is a very caring person. She looks at how to make things better, and she tries to make it that way, sometimes at her own expense. Paul is a highly regarded paramedic. He was the recipient of some prestigious awards, and he's viewed as being very competent and capable at his job. Decided that she didn't want to live in the city anymore, and it was best for their lives and family and finances to move far outside where it was cheaper. Narrowsburg, Catherine becomes so enmeshed in the community. She volunteers at the church, she works at the school, she even babysits for her neighbors' kids. This is something that is idealistic for Catherine.
I met Catherine when both of our children were 5-year-old kindergartners at the Narrowsburg school, and she was just a mother, just like me. She had a 5-year-old and she had a toddler. She was a great mother. She sometimes babysat for my kids. I would bring my son over to play with her daughter, and our toddlers would play together.
It's like this fantasy she had her whole life of living this stable kind of place and raising her kids in this amazing location are coming true. She's a volunteer. She volunteers for everything. Paul, it is the epitome of boredom. He has no interest in settling down. He loves racing motorcycles. He loves everything about kind of the adrenaline part of it.
He would show up on occasion to the morning drop-off wearing his uniform. And in those days, right after 9/11 and at the very early years of the Iraq War, anyone with a paramedic uniform on from New York, you kind of assumed might have been a hero. The real Paul Novak was cold, not social, had a porn addiction, was reckless in the extreme, was an adrenaline addict.
His porn addiction, which many of his workers talked about as just being incredibly prevalent. He's doing it on the job. And that just speaks, I think, to this addiction that he had for this ongoing kind of stimulation. In this case, it was sexual, but then we have evidence that it was for speed, it was for all kinds of things. So I think that does speak to somebody whose need for thrills and stimulation is driving him. Rationalizes and justifies it by saying, hey, I can make more money here, I'll just commute, and those kinds of things. But some of the things that Catherine's neighbors point out is that he just doesn't show any interest at all in what's going on with his wife or in any way integrating into this small community.
I would see him on occasion at the school dropping off the children or at an assembly that the kids had. Even the times that I would maybe drop off a kid at her house or interact with her at her house, I don't recall ever seeing him in that little cottage. I really don't recall him being particularly social or sociable. We didn't talk that much.
At this point, Paul is working in the city 5 days a week. He sees his wife and kids at most 2 days a week. Catherine has really distanced herself from the life they once had as EMTs together.
She gets a call one night from a woman who she doesn't know, who clearly appears to have been drinking, who is asking for her husband. And I think at that point, you know, perhaps for the first time, this light bulb goes off in Catherine's head, and she realizes that her husband was having an affair. She was kind of an intern. She started riding along sometimes with Paul. Here is this 25, young, attractive woman. Here is Paul, who's essentially living the bachelor life. So the two meet each other. You know, she rides along with him, and she's looking up to him. He's probably flattered by the attention she's giving him.
She's junior to him. She's got a troubled past. She has had several emotional issues come out. She's attempted suicide, and she's had this streak of a wild flare.
It does seem like this is somebody who has had a history of suicide attempts. You know, just somebody that we don't typically think about who's an EMT or in that line of profession. But what we do know is that, you know, she does eventually become an EMT. Paul is dazzled by Michelle, just dazzled by her.
She told me that it was one of those terrible times in the winter where everybody had the stomach flu and her kids were sick, and then she got sick. She had called him and asked him to come back from the city because, you know, it's hard to take care of kids when you're sick. Paul Novak was cold and calculating and had been talking to his fellow paramedics about how much he didn't like his wife, how happy he would be if he could get rid of her.
She is living there with her 2 children and raising them pretty much as a single parent. And their dog is there. But I do think within a relatively short period of time, Paul saw this almost more as a convenient and a plus for him because he could live these 2 separate lives. He was happy that he had the opportunity to basically have the best of both worlds if he wanted it. He can go, he can live in New York, he can live a bachelor life if he wants to. And he can get all the excitement he wants to, and then he can come up whenever he feels like it to this small town where everything is peaceful.
It was a late summer afternoon. The sun was setting over the Delaware River. It was one of those afternoons where the light is golden. All of a sudden, this van pulled up at the bottom of the stairs outside of our yard on the street, and out bounded Catherine and her daughter. And I said, hello, and we kind of chit-chatted, and right away she said, oh, I've been looking for you because my husband's having an affair and I need to get a job. I said, oh, I'm sorry. And she sort of giggled and acted like it didn't matter that much that he was having an affair, didn't go into any of the details, and just said, I need to get a job.
Catherine, I think, was a quiet person. I think she wasn't somebody who would bend her friends' ears about what was going on. And so I think at the beginning, she tried to really kind of muster through it and act like it didn't matter that much to her. It's hard to imagine how shocked I think Catherine was. In spite of the fact there'd been this separation, they'd kind of been living in 2 different places. I think some of her friends had some inklings, but for whatever reason, I think Catherine, either because she couldn't see it or she didn't want to see it, really did maintain this belief that, you know, everything was fine.
At this point, when Paul's really making some major changes in his life, he's getting divorced from Catherine, he's moving to Queens with Michelle, this is when Scott Sherwood comes into his life. Scott Sherwood is this gentle giant. He comes to meet Paul, they start discussing their own lives. He too is a fellow paramedic.
Scott Sherwood is really, in some respects, a tragic figure in some of this. He's somebody, I think, who was struggling on his own. He had a history of mental illness.
I thought he was a person that you wouldn't mind living next door to you, a person that was kind-hearted. Anyone that got to know him for 5 minutes would know that he was a good person.
Scott shares that he's recently gone through a divorce, and it was not just emotionally damaging for him, but it almost financially ruined him too.
I think he felt angry and hurt that he was paying child support and alimony, and yet felt like he wasn't able to see his child. So I think he was in a very vulnerable place in his life.
At this point, Paul thinks that because Catherine is going along with the divorce, this is going to be a quick and easy process, that he can move on with his life and be with Michelle and everything will be as it was. But Scott is the first person that tells him that's not likely the case, that this is not going to be so easy and it's likely going to cost him.
He had been talking about researching the perfect crime, how to hide a body.
On the cold December morning in Narrowsburg, a neighbor sees what they think is the early part of a sunrise coming up.
But somebody nearby recognized it was a fire and called the police.
was Catherine's house completely engulfed in flames. By the time they called 911 and the fire trucks came out, there was basically no house remaining. The question on everyone's lips is, where is Catherine? When investigators arrive, they first make sure the fire is completely put out and they go downstairs. And this is where they find Catherine's body. She's laying on her back, her legs are spread eagle. She's clearly dead, but it's impossible to tell at this point from how she died. Her dog, Aladdin, is in his crate, and sadly, he's dead too.
I think the neighbors are just absolutely horrified, and I think they're mystified. They have no idea what's happened. It's a time of the year when it's cold, and yet this fire is absolutely raged. It took hours for the police to put it out. They're in this rural community, this very, very small town. And so this is something that is so atypical for this community.
The local paper was on the table, and I looked at it, and there was a color picture on it of a charred house, and underneath it said, "A local woman dies in fire." I read the first line of the story, and there was her name.
Even though as horrible as that is, as just devastating as it is, they realize it could have been much worse because they find out that their two children are not there.
Typically, particularly in rural communities, there's a sense of safety and security because all neighbors know each other. People leave their doors unlocked.
I talked to some people that I knew, and I asked what they had heard. And the person I was talking to said, "Oh yeah, everybody here is very suspicious about that. You should talk to her pastor." So I called that person, and she also indicated that she was suspicious about it.
For one, they realized that the dog was in the kennel, and this would not be normal if Catherine was at home, the dog would be out and about. He'd also be out protecting her, so why was this not the case? Catherine was lying on her back, not near any exit, and she was spread eagle. This is completely different from how most people that die from fires and suffocation due to the smoke are found. They're often found in more of a fetal position as they're trying to escape the smoke.
Catherine's death was really devastating to the small community. Not only because she was such a lovely person to her friends, but she was such a pillar of the community. And I think maybe because of the impact that she had on this community, I think they were wanting to know what happened, more than normal.
There's someone who arouses a lot of suspicion, and it's Catherine's estranged husband, Paul Novak.
I remember picking up the phone and calling the state police and saying, "You're aware, of course, that she was, engaged in a divorce."
They were suspicious of this person who they hardly ever saw. And when he did show up, he didn't show any interest in them or make any effort. They knew, because she had mentioned that they were going through divorce, that he was having an affair.
Another thing is that neighbors knew that there was this feud essentially going on between Catherine and Paul. This wasn't just an amicable divorce.
So I actually found out that they found a body in the basement from my mother.
Even though there was all the suspicion after Catherine died, it was a very, very difficult situation for them. Nobody could put Paul Novak at the scene. There didn't seem to be any physical evidence tying him to the scene. They talked to him, he denied being there. Michelle LaFrance said, "What are you talking about? He was with me."
State police interviewed Paul Novak, and he had an airtight alibi. He also passed a lie detector test. So they really didn't have anything to go on.
He's so calm. He's very detached. He doesn't seem worried about this at all. This actually makes investigators think maybe they've got the wrong guy.
At that point, they told me that a body was found there, but they weren't sure if it was Catherine's or not.
He's calm, he's cool, he's collected. Taking a polygraph test is stressful. It's stressful for most people. And yet for somebody like Paul Novak, who is used to dealing with emergency situations, this probably was not that difficult for him. I wonder how stressed he really was. He sailed right through that polygraph test.
When the autopsy report comes back, there's another interesting finding. It is clear that she did not have enough carbon monoxide in her lungs to suggest that she died due to the fire. This means that she probably died from another cause.
The dog had died clearly of smoke inhalation, and yet the autopsy showed there was a very little smoke, if any, in Catherine's lungs.
And the way they explained that was that they thought something maybe had fallen on her head.
Catherine has 3 broken ribs, and this suggests that it's possible something fell on her during the fire, and that's what led to her death. Due to the extensive fire damage, it's almost impossible to tell conclusively what killed Catherine. The case goes cold.
I just sort of filed it away as one of those things that might happen in this community.
About a year after Catherine's death, Paul Novak collects a very substantial paycheck, $300,000 for the home insurance for the house and $500,000 for Catherine.
He had taken out an extensive life insurance policy on her months beforehand. Framed it, of course, as, good for the family and those kinds of things.
I think Paul Novak only cared about Paul Novak, and he got a large sum of money from the insurance.
And moved himself and his girlfriend and his 2 kids to a house that he bought for himself in Florida.
Paul and Michelle decide that they're going to move to Florida with the kids. This is to provide them a fresh start and get away from all of the drama and suspicions surrounding her death. Down in Florida, Paul gets a new job dispensing medication to prisoners at a local sheriff's office, and he's still a volunteer as a local firefighter.
As far as he's concerned, his problems are over. His plan is to essentially go off into the sunset and have this perfect life.
Very soon after they were living together, they started to fight.
Just like when he's with his wife, he finds Michelle. Now he's with Michelle, right? So Michelle is now the new Kathy. He starts meeting women online.
He is on Match.com looking essentially for the next person. He finds it, he's cheating on her. Michelle finds out and decides to end it. She's really had enough.
Eventually, she moved out of the house that she shared with him and the kids, moved into her own apartment in Florida.
After leaving Paul, Michelle moves on and meets a new partner of her own. This is a police officer, and Michelle decides that she feels much more comfortable now telling him what really happened. Michelle decides that she's gonna come clean and tell exactly what happened.
That police deputy urged her to contact the New York State Police, which she then did.
nobody would know, nobody would see it.
But the question is, will the word of a bitter ex-girlfriend be enough to charge him with the murder of his ex-wife, Catherine? Police are astounded by what they hear from Michelle.
The plan came out in probably November, December probably. It was a very short time that I knew about.
Okay.
And he was gonna do this. He was gonna do this and save the children.
She says, look, I lied to you. I covered for Paul Novak. He was not with me that night. As a matter of fact, not only was he not with me, I know where he was. I knew that he was going to kill Catherine.
How did it come out? How did it happen? Did he tell what?
I don't remember how exactly the conversation told, but he had me convinced that Catherine was the bad guy and he was the good parent, and these kids are abused and these kids are miserable,
do this for the kids.
and we need to save the kids.
She claims that he manages to convince her that this was all for the children, that his wife was this horrible person, she was an abusive mother, and that this was best for everybody.
Can you see anger building up in Paul, or is Paul talking about?
Paul was very calm.
Very calm. But did he?
Very controlled, very nipped up.
When Michelle is recounting to police what happened the night of Catherine's murder, she vacillates between being very matter-of-fact and being very upset.
What is he telling you that he wants to do, or how does that come about?
That he was gonna kill Catherine. He was looking into how he could do this and get this.
What happened on this December morning is that Paul went over to Catherine's house. He set the fire alarm in the basement after he entered to get her downstairs.
He was going to chloroform her, leave her, and then burn the house down around her, and she was gonna die in the fire.
He goes into the house and he lures her to the basement. The chloroform does not work. And so there is an extensive 45-minute, apparently, struggle.
Up there in the middle of nowhere, and nobody would know, nobody would see it, and,
all of his problems would be solved in his mind.
that was his plan. And we were gonna do it on a weekend that, we hit the kids would be safe.
This murder of the mother occurred when Paul had custody of his children over the weekend. He had actually given them Benadryl to knock them out, to make sure they slept through the whole night so he could escape, go kill their mother, and come back without them noticing.
He had described to her how he had killed Catherine, and she couldn't get that out of her head. She had nightmares that he was coming to kill her in the way that he had killed Catherine.
This is somebody who is maybe fearful that her ex-lover may try to do the same thing to her.
Paul Novak actually asked his friend, Scott Sherwood, to drive him to his estranged wife's house in Narrowsburg.
Paul Novak had him drive them from Long Island up to Sullivan County and was with him while he did the acts that he did. He didn't go in the house, he didn't do other things to advance the murder beyond driving him.
What does he say happened inside the house?
He had said that the chloroform didn't work. I had to strangle her. Something about hitting the gas line to ignite.
When the chloroform doesn't work as expected, Paul and Catherine start wrestling on the floor. She's fighting for her life. He's trying to do anything to kill her and decides to take her sweatshirt and wrap it around her neck, and he strangles her to death. Novak then sets the house on fire to cover his own tracks.
What was his demeanor when he came back from the house?
Seemed cold, distant.
What about you? Were you like, holy why?
I was beside myself.
Why did he do this to Catherine?
Well, he said it to me because I don't want to end up like you.
And you having gone through a very rough divorce and are in a very difficult predicament with your ex. And obviously you're not happy about that.
Paul Novak is very manipulative, and he's good at it. He can talk people into things.
Did he say if Catherine mentioned anything during the struggle?
Why are you doing this?
And what was his response?
Doing this for the kids.
Paul didn't want his car to be traced to his ex-wife's house when he was going to try to murder her. So having someone else's car would be in his best interest.
Not only did he help participate in this murder, he feels very guilty because if he didn't participate, then Catherine would probably still be alive.
I think there are a million paramedics, there are thousands of paramedics who would never think that because I see dead bodies, it makes it easier for me to murder somebody. So I think this was much more about Paul Novak and his character than it was about his profession.
Did you kill your wife?
No, I did not. And I said, do I need a lawyer? He goes, well, you know, if you ask for a lawyer, it won't really look that good. We like you. We know you didn't have anything to do with this. But the DA wants us to ask you some questions just to keep you in the clear and make everyone feel a lot better. So I'm like, all right. I mean, I don't have anything to hide.
Paul is extremely standoffish. He thinks this is preposterous. To him, he points out that it's Michelle that's the liar, and there's no evidence to support that he did anything. And he's essentially trying to, again, manipulate the police to say, why would you even believe her?
You can ask me anything you want. That's when he told me that something had happened to Catherine.
The confidence that Paul likely has comes from not just the natural level of narcissism and grandiosity that he seems to have, but he committed murder and seemed to get away with it. That must really be a boost for him in terms of his being able to know that he's probably not going to get caught. He thinks that they did such a good job when he set the fire and killed her that it will never lead to him. So what does he have anything to be worried about?
And it was the longest trial Sullivan County has ever had. So pretty much everything that could be brought to light was brought to light. There was a lot of ancillary evidence where they stopped off at a store and that corroborated Scott's story. And then you had Michelle LaFrance, who testified that Paul Novak told her a great deal of things.
He had been talking about researching the perfect crime, how to hide a body, had told his friends that he thought fire was the best way to hide a body. and had left a trail of crumbs about his guilt.
Paul Novak's colleagues had some really interesting perspectives of him because this is somebody who had won a lot of awards for life-saving measures. Paul Novak was smart enough to realize that after the jury has listened to Michelle LaFrance as well as Scott Sherwood, it is not in his best interest to get up and testify on the stand and subject himself to cross-examination.
His wife at the time, 2 weeks after the murder, knew that this had happened. And she testified in court that she didn't call the police because she didn't want to get her boyfriend in trouble, which I just find astonishing. I mean, the whole story really hinges on this community of paramedics who were witnesses to Paul Novak's bizarre behavior. I think about it every time I go back past the home. She was a very unusual type because of her sense of civic duty, her willingness to plunge in, donate her time, and there aren't a lot of people like that.
One of the saddest parts of the story is that Catherine Novak was such a giving person, and that she was attracted for whatever reason to somebody who was such a taker. And that's, the whole community really lost out when they lost her.